So I'm sitting here on the edge of the Indian Ocean here. I'll give you a little glance. Beautiful waves crashing. So, just making a quick update here. This week, Mars is going to turn retrograde. And Mars goes retrograde every couple of years. And when a planet goes retrograde, it's closer to the Earth than at any other time. And so it has a lot of strength when it goes retrograde, but it's moving backwards, which means its indicators tend to back up in our mind and consciousness. Now, what that means in real life is that the things that it rules tends to move backwards. And with Mars, this is things like courage, discipline, the willingness to suffer for our principles in reality, which means to put them into practice. Doing things like yoga and sticking to our routines and regimens, and doing things like waking up early and doing our spiritual practices and the things that we know are right. Doing what we know is right is the domain of Mars. I mean, the capacity to actually do it. Not just talk about it, not just think about it. Because when we're just talking about it and thinking about it, we're usually getting into battles and oftentimes arguing with others who we perceive are making us weak. Oh, I don't agree with you. You said this, but it's actually this way, and we waste our energy in arguments over our principles rather than actually putting them into practice. I think we all understand this very well. When Mars is powerful, we don't have time. We're not interested in arguing over our principles because we're putting them into practice. And when we do that, that's the sign of authentic strength, true strength. And this is what Mars gives. As it says in Parashara Sastra, Mars gives strength. And true strength is actually walking the talk, actually doing what we know is right, putting it into practice, not just thinking about it or talking about it or whatever. So I generally say Mars gives us the capacity to suffer for our principles when he's strong. When he's weak, we make others suffer for our principles, which means in the form of our arguments and battles and things like that. So Mars is in Leo, and he's been in Leo since November. Now, since November, there's been a lot of changes as it relates to these things. When Mars went into Leo, he had been debilitated for about a month and a half, or actually close to 2 months, and then he was in Gemini before that. So Mars had been pretty weak for a few months, and then he goes into Leo and really kicks some butt. This is the way Mars is when he enters Leo all the time, because he's just been debilitated. Then he goes into Leo, where he's very strong and principled. So since November, like the very beginning of November, you might have really made some big changes, especially as it relates to things like relationships and partners, because this is usually the first thing that we think is making us weak. This is why Mars is very hard on relationships, because Mars is how we assert our independence. And Venus is where we want to compromise. Mars and Venus are opposite each other. So, since around November, when Mars went into Leo, there has probably been some big relationship changes for you, maybe for good or ill. If it's for the good, then maybe you've had the courage to really explore some sort of deeper connection. If it's not, then maybe you've broke a certain connection and acted more through will, and perceiving others are making you weak rather than seeing the true source of weakness and things like that. Regardless, Mars is going to go retrograde, and when it goes retrograde, we're going to be reflecting on these choices. We're going to be reflecting on a lot of these things that have happened since November. Not just in relationships, by the way. I just use that as an example because Mars asserts our individuality, and that's usually has some sort of, detrimental effect on our deeper personal connections, which often includes romantic ones. But since November, it could have also been a very strong time for your career because, Mars is powerful in Leo. or other things where you've really asserted a lot of self-will, strength, and independence. So his retrograde motion is going to have us reflect on these things. So we'll be reflecting on these things a lot now, reflecting on those decisions, especially since, you know, those decisions that have been made since early November, and recalibrating and maybe having the inner courage to go back and maybe correct some mistakes if we made some mistakes, or just go back and really face those situations again. It could definitely bring some frustration out, and some, you know, anger could definitely come out, especially if certain things happened that you didn't agree with, like from other people or things like that. You could definitely be experiencing some anger issues, and Mars will be retrograde for quite a while. I actually don't have it off the top of my head right now because, as you see, I'm sitting on the beach. But starting this week, which is the week of January 23rd, I believe it's actually January 23rd that Mars goes retrograde. Again, I don't have it right in front of me. I'll have the specifics in this post. But expect yourself to be reflecting on your principles and whether or not you're really putting them into practice, how much courage you're bringing to those things, and especially how these things have changed since around November when Mars went into Leo, and the big changes that brought forth. It was a big cycle and a big shift that happened around that time. Mars going retrograde is a time for you to go back and maybe clean up some mistakes you made since then, clean up some messes, or you know, process some of the frustration that maybe you're projecting externally. You know, so, you know, perhaps someone, you know, left you or did something that you didn't really agree with around that time, or since then. You might be feeling some frustration, or you might have been, and now it's really coming to bear. You'll certainly, you know, you could really feel some possible frustration now with Mars going retrograde. You know, for the next, it's actually retrograde for a couple months. And Mars will be in Leo until June of 2012, the end of June 2012. So it's a long haul. And he went in there in November, then he's turning retrograde, so that we can reflect upon these choices and these decisions that we made since then. And then he'll move forward again and go over the same course again. So when planets go retrograde, they go over the same place like 3 times. And so whatever the territory is that the planet covers 3 times, you look at that time frame. So this is what we're looking at now with Mars, and the events that happened since he entered that retrograde shadow, which was around the first week of November. So look at the big changes and the big things that you asserted around the beginning of November when Mars went into Leo, and realize that you're now rethinking those things, reflecting upon those things, maybe feeling some frustration about some of the results. And it's an opportunity for you to be strong and courageous, to either set it straight or to move forward or to move beyond it and to get clear around it. So Mars retrograde, big thing influencing us, happening this week. Another view of the wonderful Indian Ocean. Mundaye, Kalima, 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 Chamundaya.